And Lisa, you have something you want to share?
It's just an aha moment. I really like the fact that this takes any ambiguity out of my performance and everyone's performance. It's much more objective.
Okay, thank you. So Lisa's talking about the ambiguity being gone. And we would say thank you for telling us that. Yet we still believe that you have to have conversations about what the expectations are. If we try to define every single thing that a teacher does and how, what you end up having to do is give up your own autonomy as a trained professional teacher. So what we're trying to do is give you a roadmap. So I can't remember your name again. Anthony's a new teacher. I hope I don't embarrass you. Okay. Anthony's a new teacher. And Brian, where are you? Brian Herman, where are you? School duties to attend to. Well, Mr. Herman is the principal over in Del Norte, right?
High school.
Del Norte High School. So Anthony, last year, Brian was in your position. He was a brand new principal. He did his self-assessment, and he raised his hand in front of all of his colleagues, and he said, I can't really check off a lot of these things. So we started to panic. And we said, oh my goodness, our rubric is flawed. And then he goes, I've only been in the position for 2 weeks. And we thought, oh, yes, right? So Anthony said the same thing. He goes, I'm a new teacher. When I'm doing my self-assessment, I'm not likely going to have a lot of these things checked. What do I do? I said, well, check off the things that you believe are true. If I'm your supervisor, you're going to come to me for the mid-year conference, and I'm only going to have some things checked off too, things that I've seen in the limited time that you've been at my school. But then it's my job to support you in getting to effective by the end of that year. So we can talk about what the little checkboxes mean. I can talk about what I expect to see related to each of those checkboxes when we're doing our goal setting. So Anthony, I don't know if you saw this, but what Brian saw was a roadmap. Just like Lisa just said. If I know what I'm shooting for, I can maybe hit the target. If I have no idea what you're expecting of me, it's only going to be by chance or if you like me. And that's the truth, right? Like if your principal likes you, that's saying a lot. But what this is going to do is say whether they like you or not, if they don't see these practices, you're not going to get them checked. They can still be your friend, but they're going to be honest with you and tell you that they're not seeing this evidence in your classroom. We're requiring them to do that. One of the principals in the San Juan BOCES, he raised his hand, he goes, I have a lot of pressure from my community. What's going to stop me from gaming this system? And I looked at him and I said, integrity. Right? So all of us, we all have integrity. We're representing our field. We have kids' lives in our hands. We know that 5 minutes of us saying the wrong thing with a child could cause them to drop out or worse. But we also know that in 5 minutes with the right teacher, a child can become re-engaged in school for their lifetime. So it's about balancing those things and deciding, are we going to game it, just go through the motions of a compliance exercise, or are we going to take this thing seriously, do the hard work, have the hard conversations, and get better at it over time? I hope that the latter is the answer. What other ahas did you have as you went through the self-assessment that you're willing to share? Okay, great. Let me bring you a microphone.
What I heard some people talk about as I moved around, and it was very encouraging, is that folks felt like their administration has been doing things with them to help them be successful in this process already. You know, that if you look at what the rubric is asking you to do and you think about what you've been doing staff development-wise for the past few years, it maybe starts making sense. And I'm not saying we're geniuses at the administrative level, but even if it's by accident, isn't that a great thing? But by trying to implement best practices and by trying to do that staff development, by doing those walkthroughs, by holding you accountable and by supporting you to get better, you're getting set up to where you can very easily be very successful in this process. And this is the process that helps you keep or not keep your job anymore. So that's pretty important.
Thanks, George. On the rubric, the first 3 columns start with the teacher, but then they go to students. You saw that in the simulation. I didn't hear any real negative reactions to it, and I did hear some positive reactions, like, we're doing these things. Our kids are actually doing these things. Principal's rubric looks just like this, except it says the principal, the principal, the principal, and then it says the teachers, the teachers. So the only way that the principal can get past that middle column is if they've empowered and enabled and created the culture for you to do the things that you need to thrive. And it starts on page 1 of the principal's rubric about the vision and mission. It says that the principal doesn't do it in isolation. Imagine being able to contribute to the vision and mission of the school. Even if it's to say, yes, the one that's been on the wall for 37 years is the one we still value. That can happen, right? Like, I'm from Brevard County, Florida. Our vision was to treat every student with excellence as the standard. I grew up in that system. I taught in that system, and I operate that way in my life. So that's a vision and a mission that I would commit to for my life. But if I'm a principal and I have a whole new school with new staff, I have to have a conversation about what that means. And I have to let them say, you know what, Toby? Yeah, I like what that stands for, but I think that we want something different. In order for me to get past proficient as a principal, I have to support that happening. How does this rubric affect districts in which the administration either doesn't do observations or just marks boxes, and then, of course, factor in local control? I mentioned that this is about vertical accountability, right? So if a superintendent employs a principal who haphazardly does evaluations, then that's up to that superintendent to do, right? We live in Colorado. If that's what they decide to do, that's what they're going to do. If they're getting great results for their kids, we're probably going to stay out of that conversation, okay? The field is speaking as it is. Like, they're saying, you know what? We value these standards. We value that really long definition of an effective teacher. And wouldn't it be great if an effective teacher in Center looked like an effective teacher in Poudre or in any other district there is? It doesn't matter about the demographics of the kids. It doesn't matter about the demographics of the parents. If you're effective in one, you can be effective in another. So I know for me, I've talked with a lot of superintendents, and I've had some superintendents ask me this very question, and I've just said one question back to them. Why are they working for you? But the same is true for teachers. Some principals don't give teachers the attention that the teachers need or deserve. And I say to the superintendent, why are those principals working for you? And then teachers who go in and tank the system or, say, oh, it's just a pendulum, just wait and it too shall pass. Why are you letting that persist? If students do that in your classrooms, what do? You nip it in the bud, right? Well, it's not so different whenever we're doing all these things that we think are going to make a difference for kids. We still have a lot of work to do to tell if it is going to change how kids are performing, but early indications are that it is making a difference. I can share some of those metrics if you're interested from our principal pilot, just so you can see what's happening in the state, because I've got a lot of time left. George, did I answer that? Okay. All right, so I skipped over this slide, and this is one of the most important slides there is in this whole presentation. It's about the cycle for the principal, assistant principals, and teachers. So here's what it looks like. First thing that happens is you get some training. Guess what you're all doing right now? You're getting training. Some of you are getting the blue box that says number 1. Others of you are getting the blue box that says number 2. Because you're getting orientated to the changes. You've already seen the rubric. You've tried it before. You've been in the system. If you haven't been, you're back at number 1, and guess what you're going to start to do? You're going to skip number 2 because it's included in number 1. Next. Oh, when does that happen? Prior to the beginning of school or within the first week? Now, I owe you guys a little bit of an apology because we thought we'd be able to get all this done very quickly, but it's taking us a lot of time. August 1st, we unveiled the newest rubric with all these significant changes, and we had some formatting glitches that caused some of the circles to change to squares and some of the squares to change to circles. And we had some periods that got dropped off when we cut and pasted. So we're still fixing that. And we have Bloomboard, which I have to make sure the rubric is right before I can turn Bloomboard on. So it's taking us a little bit of time. So Del Norte, they're already in their 3rd week of school, or ending their 2nd week of school, something like that. So they're not going to hit this mark this year, but that's okay. This is practice, all right? After we're done here, the next step in the process is for you to do your self-assessment. You can't do your self-assessment yet. I have to turn on the solution to do it. The reason is we want to know how you're rating yourself, all right? There's value in it. Of course, it's all for pilot purposes. We're not going to share it with anybody. Guess who gets to share your self-assessment if they want to? You do. And I'll show you how. If you want to keep it to yourself, you certainly can, but I'm going to demonstrate to you the value in sharing it with your administrator or evaluator. That's supposed to happen within the first 2 weeks after you get the training. We're probably going to do it sometime in September, okay? Hopefully. Then, by the end of September, you set some goals and write a performance plan. So some of you had a rubric that was exemplary. Everything was checked. What might be one of their items on their performance plan? Share with others. Get real, right? Like, depends on where they are in the phase. The simulations were evaluator filled out rubrics. But you could get a teacher who gives you that as a self-assessment and all their kids sleep all day. You need to have a heart-to-heart with them because what they're seeing is not what's happening. Okay? So setting the goals in the performance plan by the end of September, we'll just adjust the timeline as it goes. Okay? Then, before the end of the first semester, you have a mid-year review. You sit with your principal or your evaluator, and you look at where they think you are and where you think you are. If you agree, you celebrate. If they think you're better than you think you are, you sit quietly. If my wife thinks I did something, like mow the yard or something, and someone else did it, I'm just going to be quiet. She doesn't need to know that someone else did it. She can find that out later, and then she'll say, why didn't you tell me that someone else did it? I'm like, well, you didn't really ask that. But if they think that you're worse than you think you are, you got to have a discussion about it and what the expectations are. What do you think this means in my content area? What artifacts should I collect to demonstrate this so that by the end of the year I can be ranked where I think I am? But again, this whole system is based on human judgment. And who gets paid to make those judgments? The principal. The ones that do have teachers following them from school to school. The ones that don't have teachers not valuing their existence, I guess would be. That's probably a little harsh. You know, my principal's really good at, I don't want to go there. Having been an assistant principal and led my own school for a while, I feel like I can pick on him a little bit. After the mid-year review, by May 15th, they're going to evaluate you. Okay? They're going to go into their office, check off the boxes, do whatever they think needs done, and then they're going to have another conference with you to tell you, okay, here's where I think you are. Right? I think that you are exemplary. And then the teacher says, done. Artifacts are shared, so on and so forth. It's all done. We agree. End of cycle. It gets submitted. Done deal. If we disagree, there's still more time for additional artifacts before the final ratings are submitted. So if there's just that last little push, but guess whose responsibility it is for the artifacts? It's not the principals. It's the teachers. And it's not about buying like a 5-inch notebook and collecting everything that was good. You know how you guys have kids that only take home the paper that has the passing grade? and the mom has the folder with one sheet in it that represents everything they did all year, and it's an A, and you give them an F, and they go back, they're like, but my child got an A. And you're like, yeah, that's all they brought home, but here's some other evidence. So it's not about collecting everything, it's about knowing where you disagree, collecting evidence to tell the story in that regard. And then finally, there's goal setting for the next year. All right, so if you're going to be at the same place next year as you were last, you can set the goals and have that checked off right before the self-assessment in the next year. The only time that you'll start to do things differently is if you have a change in assignment or a change in location. Okay. Any questions about the process? There's something that's not up here. It's called an appeal. Some of you, and we skipped over 191 this morning, but one of the premises of 191 says that if you're ineffective 2 years in a row, you lose your non-probationary status. Does not mean necessarily that you lose your job, okay? But it does mean that you'll lose your non-probationary status. If you get an ineffective or partially effective rating in your second year, like for the second time, you can actually appeal that. And there's a process in the state board rules, or if you have an association, they can collectively bargain what that process looks like. If you win the appeal, right, it just means that your evaluation gets reported as a no score. It doesn't mean that you're suddenly effective. It means that you win the appeal, and now your second year is the next year. If you lose the appeal, you lose your non-probationary status, and you become a probationary teacher. Okay? And all that's in the rules if you're interested in reading such things. All right? Okay, so the question came up, who do you appeal to? If you have an association agreement, the association agreement talks about whatever the components are going to be for the appellate committee or so on and so forth. If you don't have an association, we have some model language that goes with the model system, and it says that the superintendent shall designate at least 2 teachers, neither of which contributed to your evaluation, to hear your appeal. But the superintendent has binding decision-making authority on it. Okay? They can delegate it to that committee, but they have the final say.